Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into a world that's rarely written down in royal chronicles. The strange, simple snacks that filled the bellies of ordinary people in the Middle Ages. As we drift together, we'll walk through a noisy medieval market at sunrise, where fritters sizzle in oil and cheese, curds squeak between teeth. We'll move on to festival nights with honey cakes and spiced sweets, then wander to coastal villages with fried eel and pancakes, heavy with lard. And finally, we'll turn back the clock further still, to the ancient beers of Mesopotamia and Egypt, where a simple drink carried both survival and ritual for entire civilizations. This is boring history for sleep, told slowly, steadily, by your sleepy historian here at Historian Sleepy 365. If you enjoy these quiet, meandering journeys, you can subscribe to Historian Sleepy 365. It keeps these long, sleepy stories coming, the kind of history to fall asleep to whenever you need it. So, let the lights dim, settle in, and allow these forgotten flavors of the past to lull you slow and steady toward rest. You don't need to rush. This morning, the town is still shrouded in mist. The cobbled streets feel damp, as if washed clean by the night's dew, and each step you take slides faintly over a thin layer of moss. The smell of last night's wood smoke still lingers somewhere, wrapped in the cool morning air. The market gate lies just behind a low wooden wall, where a few sheets of canvas have been strung up in a makeshift attempt to keep the rain out. A soft breeze stirs the fabric's edges. They flutter like thick paper brushing together. Inside, the first stalls are already aglow with pale yellow light from candles and oil lamps. Vendors call to one another, not loudly, just enough to rise above the birds beginning to chirp on thatched rooftops. The clatter of knives against wooden boards, the stirring of wooden spoons in iron pots, and further off, the creak of wooden wheels scraping against stone, all blend together into a slow morning symphony. The scent of hot oil reaches you first. Not the clean smell of refined oil you might be used to, but animal fat used more than once, carrying with it a hint of smoke, a touch of richness, and a kind of warmth that's hard to name. It slips gently into your nose, not harsh, just present enough to tell you something golden is being dropped in and rising to the surface. The fritter vendor's hands move steadily, unhurried. She stands behind a deep iron pan, balanced on a blackened frame, darkened with years. Each time she scoops batter from a wooden bowl, there's a quiet sizzle as it hits the oil. Tiny rings of bubbles burst up and race around the fritter's edges. This batter isn't just flour and eggs. You overhear someone whisper. There's apple in there too. Not shiny or uniform ones, just those picked from a backyard tree. Slightly tart, gently fragrant. They add complexity to the smell rising from the pan. Lightly sweet, warmly spiced, and just a little fresh and sour. She turns each fritter with care, her other hand still ladling oil gently over their tops. The lamplight flickers on the batter as it darkens from pale gold to deep amber, making them look like thick, polished coins. There aren't many customers yet, just a few people standing nearby, hands buried deep in thick sleeves to keep warm. A boy is pressed up to the counter, eyes locked on the pan, as if his whole world is made of the floating cakes before him. When one batch is lifted out, the sizzling fades, replaced by the soft sound of fritters being set on cloth to drain. A quiet rustle, like fabric drinking in the last drops of grease. The smell spreads quickly. It mingles with the scent of charred wood, the dampness of stone and soil, and a trace of spice from a nearby stall. Maybe cinnamon, maybe nutmeg. That's the air of the morning market, each scent distinct, but not competing. They simply fold into one another, layer by layer, waiting for passers-by to notice. You walk slowly past the other stalls, but your gaze keeps returning to the fritter pan. In one corner, a middle-aged man is slicing apples. His knife isn't sharp-looking, but the blade is thin and clean, moving through the fruit like cutting soft wax. Each piece falls into the thick batter and disappears beneath the surface. Here, no one times the cooking with a clock. The vendor knows the fritters are done when the oil's sound changes, from a harsh bubbling to a gentler, slower hiss. That's when the cakes are firm enough to hold their shape, hot enough to be soft inside, but not burnt. A customer steps forward, placing a few small coins on the wooden counter, darkened with years of oil and use. The vendor doesn't say much, just nods, wrapping a few fritters in a clean piece of cloth. No paper, no boxes, just fabric, to keep the warmth in and the grease from touching your hands. You consider buying some, but not yet. This scene is only just beginning, and the market still holds corners you haven't wandered into. The sound of oil sizzling rises again, steady like a morning breath, and the scent of sweet apples floats gently on the wind. Farther off, other stalls begin to light their stoves. Flames lick the bottoms of pots, casting warm flickers across the faces of those preparing the food. An old woman sprinkles something on a tabletop, perhaps flour, and begins to knead. Her palms thump the soft dough with a rhythm like someone knocking lightly on a door. Steady and patient. The crowd grows. Some carry woven baskets, others just thick cloaks. They stop, buy a few things, say a few words, then move along. No one seems in a hurry. Mornings here begin like this, slowly, softly, and hot foods like fritters are simply part of that rhythm. You pause near the fritter pan. The steam from the oil hits your face, pushing the chill from your fingertips. The scent of apples, batter, and pork fat is in the air, not refined, but real and warm. The vendor scoops another spoonful of batter, drops it in, and the soft sizzle rings out again. There's no rush in this market morning, and you, standing among the smells and sounds, don't want to rush either. You don't need to check the time to know the morning has softened. A faint light has slipped through the canvas roof of the market, landing gently on the rising steam from the oil pan. The steam looks like thin white ribbons, slowly unraveling into the air, leaving behind a scent that tells you, without needing to look, exactly what's being fried. The apple fritters here aren't fancy. There's no powdered sugar, no glossy glaze like the ones from later centuries. Just flour, eggs, maybe a touch of yeast if you're lucky, and shredded apples, but that simplicity is what lets you taste every ingredient. The apples are from backyard trees, not the polished ones you see at modern stalls. They're small, sometimes misshapen, often marked with worm spots or dark bruises. But when sliced open, the flesh is crisp and slightly tart, with a light fragrance like diluted honey. In the fritters, they soften, release their juice, and sweeten slightly with the heat. The batter isn't thin like crepe, nor thick like bread dough. Just enough to cling to the apple pieces, wrapping them like a thin blanket. When dropped into the oil, the batter begins to puff, forming a tender shell. Each time the vendor flips one over, the oil catches the light, making the fritter shimmer like it's been brushed with gold. You buy a small portion, 2 fritters, wrapped in a piece of freshly washed linen. The vendor hands them to you with a slight nod. The coin you trade doesn't clink like new metal, just a deep, weighted sound before it disappears into the cloth pouch tied at her waist. The first thing you notice holding them is the heat. It seeps through the linen into your palm. You walk slowly, letting them cool slightly, letting the aroma settle more clearly. The first bite, the outer layer breaks gently, not with a dry crunch, but a soft resilience that clings slightly to your teeth. Inside, it's hot and yielding, The apple has half melted, blending with the flour and fat. A touch of sweetness, a touch of tartness, and the faintest trace of salt from the batter, just enough to warm the stomach without being bold. You chew slowly. The sounds of the market drift farther away, muffled by the flavors in your mouth. The creak of wooden wheels, footsteps, bargaining voices. They all fade into the background, making space for the small attention you give to this pastry in your hand. At the next table, an old man eats his fritters differently, tearing off small pieces, dipping them into thick honey held in a wooden bowl. This honey isn't finely filtered. Bits of pollen and wax still remain. The scent is stronger, the sweetness deeper. Coating the fritter, it forms a glossy layer that makes the outer shell just slightly sticky. You remember what the vendor said while wrapping your fritters, that they're best eaten while the morning mist still clings to the air. Maybe it's because the cold sharpens the contrast. The heat of the fritter more vivid, the scent of apple and oil more intense against the early breeze. People in the market don't eat fritters to be full. They're a pause, a small joy, before returning to work. Someone buys just one, eating while walking. A group of children shares a few, competing for the pieces with the most apple. A woman passes by, buying a large bundle, maybe for a family at home. The soft hiss from the oil pan continues steadily, like the heartbeat of this stall. Each batch takes a few minutes. And every time fresh fritters are pulled from the oil, the smell blooms again, fuller, as if the process never gets old, even for those who've eaten this treat a dozen times or more. You sit down on a low wooden stool at the edge of the market and start your second fritter. It's cooled slightly, the shell a bit firmer, but the inside still soft. You chew slower this time, noticing the spongy texture, the light richness clinging to your tongue. A small sparrow hops close, tilts its head, and stares at your hand. It seems to know someone will share. You pinch off a small piece and drop it. The bird pecks quickly, then flies off, leaving only the sound of fluttering wings behind. From the corner of the market, a new group has arrived. Their voices lively, their cloaks still carrying the scent of hay. Moments later, they too gather around the fritter pan. And the rhythm continues. Someone asks about this year's apples. Someone complains about the price of flour. You feel time move slower here. Not because there's nothing to do, but because no one rushes. Each bite of fritter, each exchange of words carries its own pause, as if everything has its place and no one is trying to push past it. By the time you finish the last piece, the warmth still lingers in your hand. The faint smell of apple clings to you, mingling with the smoke and wood and market air. And as you stand up, you realize the fritter stall was only the beginning. Ahead lies an entire row of other vendors, each with its own scent, its own sound, its own quiet story. You walk away but glance back one last time at the pan of oil. The vendor is still working, her hands moving slow and steady, as if nothing could interrupt her. The sound of frying mixes with the morning air, and new fritters begin to puff and turn golden, ready for someone else to take and carry with them. You leave the fritter stall, walking slowly along the path between two rows of vendors. The stone beneath your feet is still damp, though no longer slick like it was at daybreak. The sun has only just risen enough to cast a few pale streaks of light, filtered through the hanging cloths above. The scent of apples and frying oil still lingers in your cloak, but now a new smell begins to rise. Fermented milk, strong but not sharp, like something left undisturbed through a short season. At the end of the path, beside a bread stall, stands a low wooden table, shorter than the others. Behind it sits a young woman, her headscarf, once white, now turned a soft cream. Her hands are busy arranging pieces of cheese into small stacks. In front of her, in a deep basket, lies what makes you stop. Small, uneven chunks of pale yellow-white, looking softer than the firm wheels of cheese stacked behind. They're cheese curds. Fresh, unpressed cheese, still in its first form. They aren't laid out on dry linen like aged cheese, but on a layer of clean, slightly glossy leaves. The leaves keep them from sticking together and carry with them a faint scent of fresh milk. Unlike the deeper, stronger smell of mature cheese, you step closer. Your footsteps drown out the conversation between two customers at the bread stall. The woman behind the table looks up and offers a quiet smile, then reaches into the basket and places a small piece in your hand, a silent invitation. The curd is soft, cool, and slightly moist. When you lift it to your nose, you catch the scent of fresh milk with a gentle tang, not a sharp sourness, but the mild acidity of something just parted from the milk it came from. You take a bite. It breaks between your teeth with a faint snap, like something both tender and lightly elastic. The flavor is clearly milky, though not rich, like aged cheese. There's a touch of salt from the light brine used to preserve it. The gentle sourness gives it a fresh brightness, fitting for a morning that's slowly warming. As you chew, you notice a faint sound, too subtle to call a noise, but just enough to register. The texture of proteins breaking down, like threads snapping quietly under pressure. The woman explains, "This is the young part of the cheese, separated from the milk just hours ago. When warmed and mixed with rennet, milk splits into curds and whey, the solid and the liquid. The whey is drained, the curds gathered, lightly pressed and salted. If left to age, they would become dense, heavy wheels. But eaten fresh, they retain all their moisture and delicate flavor. You buy a small bundle, the curds placed into a cloth pouch tied with twine. Your hand feels the coolness from inside the bag, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the fritters you had earlier. You stand beside the table, eating slowly, observing. In one corner of the table, there's a large wooden bowl holding leftover whey. Its color is pale yellow, nearly clear, its scent faint. An old man stops by asking for a ladle of it to drink. It's often used as a light refreshment or in cooking. The woman scoops some out for him and he drinks slowly, setting the ladle down as though returning a borrowed treasure. You take another bite of curd, more attentively this time. As your teeth sink in, the soft surface gives way to a denser, slightly chewier center. You chew longer. The mild salt blends with the milkiness, and finally, a faint creaminess lingers at the back of your tongue. If the fritters brought warmth and fullness, the curds offer something lighter, something cool and bright. The area around the stall isn't crowded. A few customers stop by, exchange a few words, buy a handful of curds or a larger wheel of cheese, then continue on. No one is in a hurry, as if they're moving through the morning in measured steps, slow enough to notice scent, flavor, and the quiet spaces between the stalls. A young boy stops by, given a piece of curd by his mother. He chews quickly, then grins, a bit of white cheese still stuck to the corner of his mouth. She wipes it away with her sleeve, no scolding, and they move on. You notice the hands of the woman selling the cheese, sun-browned skin, short nails, the tips of her fingers darkened by salt and milk. These hands do more than sell cheese. They knead dough, tend fires, stack shelves. Her movements are slow, not from fatigue, but because there's nothing rushing her. As you finish the last bite, a mild saltiness still lingers on your tongue. A breeze drifts through from the market entrance, carrying the smell of toasted bread from a stall across the way. You look around, fritters, curds, bread. Each one feels like a step in this quiet morning journey. You thank the vendor, tie the cloth pouch a little tighter, and begin to walk again. The market path opens ahead, revealing new colors: golden bread, brown wood, red-dyed fabric, and farther off, a wisp of grilled meat in the air. But before reaching it, you already know you'll stop at one more place, where the scent is earthy, faintly sweet, and just a little sharp. Perhaps a stall selling cakes made from root vegetables. You follow the market path, leaving behind the scent of fresh milk and the lingering saltiness on your tongue. The space shifts slowly. The sound of chopping knives and clinking spoons fades, giving way to something lower. The tap of wooden spoons against clay molds, the gentle thud of pies releasing from their forms, and somewhere nearby, the smell of cooked turnip begins to rise. The turnip pie stall has no sign, just a long table set against a stone wall, topped with round pies, their edges slightly cracked. The surface is pale yellow from the wheat flour, speckled here and there with darker spots, maybe where the honey has soaked through. Behind the table, a man in his 40s is using a wooden knife to cut each pie into 8 portions, laying the slices on a wooden tray for individual sale. The smell of turnip pie isn't like any other sweet in the market. It's not fragrant like apples or honey, but carries the soft sweetness of root vegetables slowly cooked. Woven through it is the scent of baked dough, warm and faintly scorched at the edges. When the breeze passes, it mingles with the smoke drifting from a distant meat stall, creating a layered aroma, part hearth, part garden. You step closer, eyes resting on the filling now exposed by a recent cut. It's a creamy yellow, smooth, with a few darker strands, perhaps turnip skin or shreds of herbs. The man speaks quietly, as though not wanting to disturb the stillness of the morning. Says the filling is made from soft-boiled turnips mashed with eggs and a touch of honey, then baked in a sturdy wheat crust. You buy a slice, wrapped in a folded piece of cloth to keep the crust from touching your hand. As you lift it closer, a soft warmth seeps through, not piping hot like the fritters, just enough to make the filling more supple than it would be cold. The first bite, the crust is a little thick, giving a slight resistance, but the inside is smooth, like a thick porridge pressed into shape. The taste of turnip begins sharp, earthy, but quickly softens as the honey melts in. There's a bit of richness from the egg, and a faint, soil-like finish that reminds you this is a vegetable, not a fruit. You chew slowly, noticing how the faint sweetness fades, leaving behind the warmth of baked grain and a hint of spice. In some bites, you find finely ground black pepper, an unusual guest in sweet dishes, but one that keeps the pie from becoming too simple. An elderly woman buys a whole pie, wraps it carefully, and tells the seller she's saving it for dinner. He nods, reminds her to reheat it over coals so the crust crisps again. You picture the pie set on a wire rack, the gentle heat waking the turnip and honey filling a small kitchen with their quiet blend. You take another bite, this time paying attention to the texture. The crust is firm but not dry, holding the filling without stealing its moisture. The filling itself is soft but not runny, each chew letting the mashed turnip melt into the honey, leaving a warmth that lingers gently on the tongue. The conversation around the small stall flows evenly. Someone asks about this year's turnip harvest. Another recalls how the fields flooded last season. All of it calm, like the pie itself. Unflashy, unhurried, not made to impress, but simply to be. At the end of the table, there's a small plate with sample slices. A boy, his hands still muddy, picks one up and chews thoughtfully. He turns to his mother, whispers something, and she nods, handing over coins for a slice of his own. You finish your piece, and the warmth of turnip and honey remains. There's no cloying sweetness, no strong fragrance, just a quiet satisfaction, like sitting near a fire without speaking, listening only to the soft crackle of wood. The seller wipes his hands on his apron, then carefully arranges more fresh pies on the table. Every motion slow, unrushed, as though he knows each pie will find its owner sooner or later. You thank him, fold the now empty cloth and begin to walk again. The scent of pie still clings faintly to your hand. Ahead, the smell of meat and spices is growing clearer, leading toward the next stall, where savory, meat-filled pastries wait, richer and stronger in every way. You leave the turnip pie stall and continue toward the heart of the market, where the scent of meat begins to overpower everything else. The air here is warmer, as if the heat from the ovens has formed a thin blanket hanging overhead. Even from a distance, you can hear the hiss of fat hitting hot surfaces, the rhythm of knives against chopping boards, and the hollow thump of clay oven lids being lifted and set back down like a gentle drumbeat. The meat pasty stall sits near the edge of the market, beside a small open space where fires are built outdoors. The wooden table in front is dusted with flour and lined with crescent-shaped pasties, each edge folded neatly. Their thick crusts are cracked in places, revealing the darker filling just beneath. The baker, a man with broad hands and cloth wrapped around his wrists, is using a wooden paddle to pull pasties from the oven. Each time he lifts the lid, steam escapes, carrying the scent of meat, onions, and a touch of warm spice. The smell is full and deep, but never harsh, as if everything has simmered together long enough to become one. You step closer and watch as one pasty is sliced in half. The filling is a mix of finely minced meat, onions, and scattered bits of root vegetables, maybe carrots, maybe turnips, all seasoned with salt, black pepper, and perhaps a trace of dried fennel. The meat has darkened to a rich brown, glistening slightly from the fat. You buy a small one, handed to you in a piece of grease-stained parchment. The first bite. The crust is firm at the edge with a soft crunch, but chewier toward the center. The filling is warm, savory, the salt deepened by the sweetness of the vegetables, and the finish carries the gentle heat of black pepper. The steam from the meat has softened the inner crust, giving each bite both strength and softness. Around you, a few others are eating, leaning against the stone wall or sitting on benches near the stall. A young man breaks his pasty in two, handing half to the child beside him. They eat slowly, occasionally switching places to avoid the smoke from the oven. As you near the end of your pasty, a soft call catches your attention from the opposite stall. Small glass jars filled with dark brown seeds, each coated in a thin white sugar crust. You step closer and realize they're candied fennel seeds, dried fennel, soaked in syrup, then left to dry until the sugar crystallizes on the surface. The vendor, an elderly woman with silver hair tied neatly, opens a jar and pours a small handful into your palm. The seeds are light, dry, and as soon as you place one in your mouth, the sugar melts away first, a clear, clean sweetness. Then the fennel begins to bloom, a familiar aroma, something like licorice, but softer, tinged with coolness. She tells you that during festival markets, candied fennel is often given after meals, a small gift to freshen the breath and lighten the mouth after meats or rich food. You chew slowly, the sweetness and fragrance rising through your nose, then fading, leaving a trace of coolness, like a ghost of mint. You buy a small pouch, tuck it into your coat pocket. The fabric is thin, you can feel the round seeds rolling gently with each step. There'll be something to nibble on as you leave the market behind. By now the sun has climbed higher, casting its light into the courtyard, at the far end of the stalls. Music echoes faintly, hand drums, wooden flutes, and someone singing a slow melody. Along the path to the square, new stalls are being set up, taller, more colourful than those inside the market. You pass through the wooden gate, stepping onto a stone-paved road that leads toward the central plaza. The air is different here, less of oil and smoke, more of dried flowers strung along the walkway, the smell of freshly baked bread, and somewhere nearby the syrupy scent of sugar melting in a large pan. The sounds have changed too. Voices are louder now, vendors calling out, children laughing, grown-ups dragging tables into place. You see booths with red, yellow, and blue cloth roofs, one hanging long links of sausage, another displaying cakes crusted in nuts, and farther still a large stall stirring thick soup for lunch. The morning in the market has ended with the heaviness of meat and the sweet echo of fennel. Before you, the midday feast of the seasonal festival is opening up, louder, brighter, and filled with dishes that hadn't yet arrived when the day was still new. As you step out of the alley that leads from the morning market into the main square, it feels like crossing into another world. Gone are the low-roofed stalls pressed tightly together, the narrow paths thick with the scent of earth and cooking smoke. Before you, the space opens wide. Sunlight pours over pale stone, reflecting back in a soft, silvery sheen. Red, yellow, and blue cloths hang from rooftop to rooftop, swaying gently in the breeze. Along the square, the stalls are taller, like the kind that only appear during festivals. Each one is decorated with care, some draped with garlands of dried flowers and bay leaves, others with fringes of hand-dyed wool. The sounds are different too. Calls of vendors mingle with laughter, children's voices echoing off stone. Farther off, a slow rhythm of hand drums keeps steady time, blending with the high notes of wooden flutes. It's not hurried, more like a background melody played all day long, so people can eat, talk, and wander without ever losing the rhythm. You don't need to search long to know what's drawing everyone in this part of the square. From the left, a deep, sweet, warmly spiced scent draws you to a stall beneath a honey-colored awning. On a wooden table, dark brown cakes are stacked high, each block nearly the height of a hand. The tops glisten faintly as if just brushed with syrup. These are honey cakes, the sweet that has become almost symbolic of autumn festivals in this town. The vendor, a woman with cheeks flushed from the heat of the oven, is slicing the cakes with a long, thick knife. It passes through the dense crumb with a firm stroke, revealing a warm brown interior dotted with tiny flecks of spice: cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg. As she lifts the blade, the scent intensifies, honey blended with flour, spices, and the long, steady heat of a wood-fired oven. You watch for a moment. In the corner of the table, a fresh block has just been set down, still warm. She takes a large wooden spoon and drizzles golden honey over the top, letting it soak into every small crack. Sunlight catches the glaze, turning the surface amber, almost glowing. When you buy a slice, she wraps it in waxed paper, slightly sticky at the edges from the honey. You hold it with both hands. The cake is warm, dense, heavier than it looks. As you bring it closer, the scent floods in, not the pale, filtered honey of glass jars, but late summer honey, amber dark, rich, with notes of grass, flowers, and a faint hint of smoke from hives kept near the edge of the woods. The first bite, your teeth press through the smooth, slightly chewy crust. Inside, the cake is dense yet moist, like a compressed sponge, still holding warmth and scent. The sweetness doesn't hit all at once. It glides across your tongue slowly, weaving between the warm bite of cinnamon, the gentle heat of ginger, and the sharp edge of nutmeg. With each chew, the honey deepens, joining the natural moisture of the cake. When you swallow, the flavor lingers at the back of your throat, warm, dark, and steady. You realize this isn't just a sweet, but something made to match the mood of the festival, sturdy enough for the cold, sweet enough to remind you this day is meant to be special. The vendor tells you the cake is prepared days before the festival. The batter, a mix of dark honey, coarse flour, eggs, milk, and spices, is poured into wooden molds and baked long and slow in oak-fired clay ovens until the crust sets evenly and the center reaches just the right softness. Then it's left to rest, to let the flavor ripen before slicing. By the second bite, the sweetness and warmth begin to carry you into a memory, not yours exactly, but a thread of story that has passed through centuries. You picture a market in the golden age of the Islamic world, not a stone square, but narrow streets with white and blue cloth awnings stretched overhead to block the sun. Spice stalls overflowing with cinnamon, cardamom, saffron, clove. Ingredients that once crossed oceans and deserts to reach Europe, eventually finding their way into honey cake recipes. There, the cakes wouldn't be dense squares. Perhaps they would be soft slices of basbousa, made from semolina and honey, topped with toasted almonds. Or katayef, stuffed with dates, drizzled in light syrup, eaten warm. The honey might be gentler, but the spices sharper, more fragrant, more vivid, more alive. You imagine holding one of those sweets, hearing the noise of a 10th century Baghdad market, the splash of water poured from copper jugs, the rhythmic thud of spices ground in stone. A bite releases sweetness, only to be sliced through by the brightness of cardamom, a sharp clarity cutting through the syruped calm. And then you return to the slice of honey cake in your hand, different in form, ingredients, and oven, but sharing the same spirit. A sweet heavy with the flavor of the season, made to be shared on special days, meant to be eaten slowly, chewed fully, and felt as a sign of abundance. All around you, the square continues its rhythm. Children run past, each holding a half-eaten piece of cake. A man eats as he nods along to the drumbeat. On a nearby table, a jug of honey wine rests beside a plate of cake, the rising scent of alcohol mixing with cake's warmth into something faintly intoxicating. You take your last bite. The honey and spices settle into your stomach, a soft, lasting heat. The wax paper, sticky at the corner, you fold and tuck away, a small trace of the cake kept like a souvenir. Across the square, a stall is releasing plumes of smoke. The smell of lamb, slow roasted over wood, reaches into the open air, cutting through the sweetness that still lingers here. You look toward it and see long skewers dripping fat over coals, the hiss of fire answering each drop. That will be your next stop dash. A savory, smoky counterpoint ready to balance the dark sweetness of honey cake. After leaving the honey cake stall and stepping out of the sweet-scented air, you follow the smell of roasting meat and the rising hum of voices toward the far corner of the square, where a seafood vendor has set up a small but striking stall. No dried flowers, no colored cloths. Their stall is made of rough wooden planks as if pieced together from the ribs of an old boat. On the table sit wide trays filled with something you've never seen in inland markets. Strips of fish skin, already cut, already dried, now waiting to be dropped into bubbling oil. The vendor is a middle-aged man, sun-browned skin and silver at his temples. He wears a thick, coarse shirt, a long wooden ladle in hand. Each time he drops a few strips of skin into the pot, the oil leaps up in a chorus of crackles. Within seconds, the pieces curl and rise, changing from dull grey to pale gold, and then to a deeper amber at the edges. The smell that rises is unmistakable, a mix of sea, oil, and a trace of smoke from the wood burning underneath. It isn't the sharp, fishy scent you might expect. It's warm, dense, as if every strip of skin still carries the salt wind and sun of the harbor it came from. You remember a story once told of a small port town where each morning, as the boats returned, they'd keep the thick skins from the largest fish, wash them in seawater, and hang them across ropes between two wooden poles. Once dry, they'd go into the first batch of oil, hot, fresh, and be sold to dock workers, sailors, and passing travelers. The man at the stall lifts the golden cracklings from the oil and sets them to drain on coarse cloth. They hit the surface with a soft clatter, like pebbles falling gently into one another. Almost immediately, a nearby child reaches out and receives a still smoking piece. He bites. The sound is crisp, clean, loud enough for you to hear. He chews quickly, grinning at his mother. You buy a small portion served in a wooden bowl. The first piece brushes your lips, the surface dry, impossibly light. When you bite, it shatters into airy flakes, disappearing quickly, leaving behind a faint saltiness and a clear taste of the sea. Like standing on a pier, the wind pushing brine onto your tongue. The blend of fresh oil and sea makes a flavor that feels both simple and unexpected amid a festival filled with sweets and grilled meats. The salt isn't heavy, just enough to wake the appetite, enough to make you want another bite. The vendor tells you these cracklings were once secondary food, made from what was usually discarded, given to those who couldn't afford the fish itself. But over time, their crispness and deep sea flavor drew more attention, until now, at festival time, his stall is always busy. As you chew, you imagine yourself further south, at a larger port, where ships from the east have docked with holds full of spices, fabric, and dried seafood. Vendors along the piers have oil pots beside their fishing nets, frying cracklings to offer passers-by. The sounds of waves, seabirds, and bubbling oil blend into an unforgettable soundtrack. In the Middle East, during the Golden Age of Islam, a dish like this might be made from spiced fish skin, cardamom, pepper, or fennel rubbed on before frying. The spices didn't just mask scent, they elevated it, turning the snack into a perfect pairing for evenings by the Tigris. You return to your last piece of crackling. As it melts away in your mouth, it leaves behind a thin film of oil, a fading note of salt and sea. You take a sip of water from the small flask you carry. The soft brine dissolves, leaving only the smoky trace of firewood in your nose. In the distance, the hand drums quicken. People begin to gather near the center of the square, drawn to a large stall displaying trays of sweets, dusted with sugar and studded with almonds. You wipe your hands on a cloth, step away from the crackling stall and walk toward the next flavor. Something softer, sweeter, but no less rooted in memory and the distant corners of the world. As the golden light of afternoon deepens into amber, the rhythm of the festival square begins to shift. The loud calls of daytime slowly fade, replaced by lower conversations, softer laughter, and the dry crackle of firewood from newly lit evening fires. The bright fabric canopies strung across the street are now tinged with shadow, their colors dimmed, illuminated only here and there by torches or oil lamps hung above the stalls. You've walked through many flavors today, from the rich sweetness of honey cake to the crisp salt of cracklings. And now, your body begins to seek something else, warm, soft, and light enough to soothe the stomach after a long day of celebration. A warm, malty scent draws you toward a modest stall near the edge of the square. There, a large cast-iron pot simmers quietly over a charcoal stove filled with a thick, amber-brown liquid, sending out steady waves of steam. The vendor, an old man with a silver beard wrapped in a heavy cloak, ladles the liquid over coarse slices of bread placed in deep wooden bowls. The bread soaks it in, softening until it nearly collapses, though it still holds its shape. In a hoarse voice, he explains, "This is bread soaked in ale, a dish that appears late in the festival, when the temperature dips and people need a bit of warmth and grain to carry them into the night. You sit down on a long bench beside the stove and receive your bowl. The rising heat immediately touches your face, carrying the unmistakable scent of ale, the smell of cooked grains, a gentle sourness from the fermentation, and a faint sweetness from molasses or honey, sometimes stirred in. Beneath it all, the scent of barley bread lingers, no longer dry, but transformed by warmth and yeast. You dip your wooden spoon into the bowl. The bread is so soft it barely resists. It melts on your tongue, leaving behind a deep warmth and the mild bitterness of ale, not the sharpness of modern beer, but something smoother, quieter, like a backdrop that lets other notes rise, the light sweetness of honey, the woody trace of oak barrels, the faint smoke of the charcoal fire. Around you, a few others are eating the same dish. A group of sailors huddles close, bowls in hand, sharing stories of the sea. An older woman, headscarf drawn tight, spoons it gently into the mouth of a child, sitting at her side. No one rushes. It's a dish made for slow eating, to feel the heat seep through the bowl into your fingers and from there into the rest of you. The old man says that in many places this dish was once a poor man's breakfast, a way to use stale bread and cheap ale. But during festivals it becomes a meal for the night, a reason to gather near the fire, to talk, and to stretch the joy a little longer. You take another spoonful, noticing the texture now. The pieces that soaked longer have broken down into something like thick porridge, while those near the surface stay soft but still hold a bit of chew. That subtle variation keeps each bite just different enough to stay comforting without becoming dull. The taste of ale calls to mind tales of coastal taverns, where sailors just returned from long voyages would be given a bowl of bread and ale as a welcome back to land. In the ports of the golden Islamic world, ale might not have been used, but a similar dish existed. Bread soaked in spiced milk, sweetened with honey, served warm at night. The flavors were different, but the purpose the same, to quiet the body, to slow the mind, to carry people gently into rest. You finish most of the bowl and feel warmth building from within. A cold wind slips in from the far corner of the square, but the heat of the dish still lingers on your lips and the trace of malt stays in your breath. You drink the last sip of broth, a little sweeter now, a little gentler, like a soft ending to an evening meal. As you set the bowl down, you notice the drums in the square have quieted, replaced by the soft hum of string instruments. People begin to rise slowly. Some pull their cloaks tighter, others light torches and walk toward the gates. The festival is not over, but it has entered midnight's domain, a time for quiet talk, for foods that ask nothing of you, and for firelight dancing over cold stone. You thank the old man, step beyond the glow of the hearth, and let the sound of strings guide you toward another corner of the celebration, where something unexpected may be waiting from some other corner of the world. As the firelit warmth of the old man's ale-soaked bread fades behind you, you follow a narrower stone path leading outward from the square's edge. There, the sound of drums and laughter begins to blur, replaced by the clatter of horse hooves on stone and the soft chime of metal as the iron gate ahead opens and closes again. Beyond it, the torchlight thickens, but not the kind that belongs to markets. This glow spills from the wide portico of a stone manor, perched just slightly above the square on a gentle rise. Heavy curtains hang over the doorway, drawn slightly apart to reveal a warm golden light inside and slow-moving silhouettes within. You step in and immediately sense the difference. The air here is warm but dry. No scent of wood smoke. No oil from frying pans. Instead, the polished hush of beeswax candles, the faint gleam of oiled wood, and the deep fragrance of red wine just poured from its cask. At the center of the room stands a long table dressed in brocade. At its head, a servant in a dark tunic holds a silver tray, upon which sit small white ceramic bowls. Each bowl cradles a slice of soft white bread, soaked through in a deep red liquid. These are sops in wine, a dish rarely spoken of in the streets outside, but here served as naturally as candlelight. You receive a bowl from the servant's hands. The bread, a luxury in itself, made from finely sieved brownless wheat, has absorbed the wine almost entirely. It no longer keeps its original shape, but sags slightly, glistening where the candlelight strikes its soaked surface. As you lift the bowl closer, the aroma deepens around you, not sharp, not sour, but mellow, rich. Wine aged long in wood, with hints of oak and dried fruit. Folded into it is the scent of melting butter and cinnamon, a sign the wine was gently warmed with spices before being ladled over the bread. You take a spoonful with a thin silver utensil. The bread is smooth, nearly collapsing at your touch. On your tongue, the warmth of the wine unfolds, carrying a light sweetness and the gentle spice of cinnamon. The softness of the bread, soaked through, turns it almost creamy, like thick custard, but warmer, darker, deeper. Near you sits a guest in a velvet cloak of dark green. They speak softly, noting that sops in wine once began as a discreet way for nobility to soften stale bread, to reuse without appearing to need. But over time, it became a refined course in its own right, especially when served with wine from storied vineyards or steeped with rare spices like nutmeg, clove, or saffron. You listen and imagine this scene in another great hall, in winter, snow outside, a hearth ablaze within, and on the long table, bowls of sops in wine offered as a warm welcome to arriving guests. Candlelight flickering across the surface of the wine-soaked bread, casting it in deep ruby hues. In the golden age of the Islamic world, you picture a counterpart. White bread soaked in thick grape molasses, dibs scattered with roasted nuts or hazelnuts, sometimes perfumed with rosewater. Different ingredients, yet the same spirit. To turn bread into something soft, sweet, fragrant. A way to warm the body and quiet the mind. You return to the present with your second spoonful. This time, you notice the way the flavor moves. First, the spice. Cinnamon, faint but clear. Then the wine. Rich, full, surrounding everything. And finally, after you swallow, the sweetness remains, light and slow, like a whispered goodbye. The sound in the room is softer than in the square. Spoons brushing ceramic. Wine poured in slow ribbons, conversations held low. No one hurries through this dish. It seems made for pausing, for tasting in silence, spoonful by spoonful, beneath candlelight and the quiet warmth of wine. As your bowl nears empty, the servant pours a little more warm wine into it, softening the last pieces. You finish them slowly. Set your spoon down. And feel a warmth begin to rise in your chest, not from fire, but from within. The steady, internal heat of fermented grain and spice winding gently through your blood. Outside, night has fully arrived. As you step from the manors-covered porch, the cold air touches your cheek, but it no longer bites. You descend the stone path back toward the town, where the flames of the night market still flicker in the distance. And in your mind, the warm sweetness of sops in wine lingers like a quiet bridge between the private world of candlelit tables and the bright, laughing chaos of the folk festival below. You leave the street where the torchlight of the noble manor still flickers behind velvet drapes and make your way back toward the square. By now the festival has quieted. The drums have faded to silence, replaced by the sparse notes of string instruments echoing from a small corner stage. The cake and wine stalls still glow with lamplight, but the crowds have thinned. The scent of roasted meat, honey, and fermented grain still hangs gently in the air, mingling with the night breeze. In the distance, you spot a small group of Eastern merchants gathered around a low table. Under the soft glow of oil lamps, wooden chests and brass tins lie open, each revealing a small trove of color and texture: saffron yellow spices, sugar-dusted candies, glistening cubes of fruit preserves, and small, round honey cakes thick as coins. You step closer. One man, wearing a white turban and a deep-hued robe, opens a brass tin and tilts it toward you. Inside are small, cube-shaped sweets, translucent and amber-colored, soft to the touch. He calls them rahat lokum, sugar confection scented with rose or lemon, sometimes studded with hazelnuts or almonds. As you raise one to your nose, the scent of rosewater rises, not cloying but soft and fleeting. You take a bite. The sugar melts instantly on the tip of your tongue, leaving the gently chewy center to linger. The rose blooms slowly, a fragrance more than a flavor, lingering even after the sweetness begins to fade. It reminds you of the fruit pastes from Northern Europe's markets. But here, the delicacy lies in how the scent remains, long after the sugar has gone. On the table, there are also small, round honey cakes, their surfaces covered in toasted sesame. The merchant tells you they are pekmezli kumba, made from grape molasses or honey, wheat flour, and spices like cinnamon and clove. You break one open. The scent of dark honey and warm spice escapes at once. Similar to the honey cakes of the European midday fare, but the texture is different, denser, firmer, asking to be chewed slowly before its moisture and depth fully reveal themselves. You taste a piece and find yourself caught in a quiet duet with the honey cake from earlier in the day. Both use honey and spice, but here the spices strike sharper, more vivid. The sweetness steps back, letting the heat and aroma lead, as if meant to awaken instead of lull. Beside them, in a ceramic jar, the merchant offers fruit preserves, murabba. A slice of golden apricot shines like glass, soft but not broken. You let it rest on your tongue. A light tartness spreads first, followed by a growing sweetness. It dissolves with a smoothness that reminds you of the strawberry preserves from the northern fairs, but here the slow cooking with cinnamon and sometimes pepper leaves a warmth beneath the sugar. A second flavor, hidden, waiting. You sit beside them, listening as they speak of the journeys these sweets have made. From the port cities of the Mediterranean, merchants brought honey, sugar, and spice eastward, saffron, nutmeg, clove, and traded for wool, tin, or glass from the west. The sweets and honey cakes were not just goods, they say. They were gifts, symbols of wealth, of tokens of connection between distant worlds. In the flicker of oil lamps, you imagine another marketplace. In Istanbul, lanterns of many colors swaying above stalls crowded with lokum, preserves, stacked honey cakes, and bags of spice. The scent of rose, honey, and warm spice weaving a market atmosphere unlike any found in the West. Denser, more layered, like a tapestry of air. Back in the present, you bite another piece of lokum, the slow dissolve of sweetness holding your attention, and you realize this pace, this melt, is why people linger. Unlike street snacks meant to be chewed and gone, these confections are invitations to stay, to speak longer, to let the moment stretch. The merchant pours you a small cup of warm herbal water, steeped in anise and cinnamon, to close the sweetness. The warmth settles from your throat to your chest, melding with the honey and spice still on your tongue, layering into something slow and lasting. A night breeze brushes the square, carrying the sound of waves from the harbor. One of the merchants rises, signaling the others to begin packing. You follow them out of the glow of oil lamps, stepping onto the stone slope that leads down toward the pier. Under the moonlight, the water glimmers, reflecting torchlight and the swaying lanterns of moored boats. Waves lap gently at wooden hulls. Ropes creak. Here, where goods change hands and flavors meet wine, you feel as though you've walked a full circle of the festival, from the bright noise of morning's market, through the sweet and savory core of the day, into the quiet hush of the harbor at night. On your lips, a whisper of honey, spice, and sugar still lingers. And somewhere behind you, the voices of the Eastern merchants drift like a memory, carrying with them the taste of faraway lands, folded into the rhythm of waves, guiding you gently into the next story. The road you took this morning began at the harbor, where the scent of sea salt and resin still lingers in the air, then wound its way past barley fields turning gold, and dewy meadows soaked in early morning mist. The sea breeze here carries a light chill, not sharp, but enough to seep through every layer of clothing, reminding the body that autumn is nearly over, and winter is only a few weeks away. About halfway through the morning, you spot signs of a country market. Thin wisps of smoke rising from thatched rooftops, scattered laughter mingled with voices bartering, and the faint, pungent scent of pickled cabbage being sold somewhere nearby. This isn't the kind of crowded, clamorous market found in cities, but rather a loose ring of farmers and fishermen from a few miles radius, gathering to trade goods, sell what they've made, or simply talk. As you step into the open patch of land between houses, your eyes are drawn to one particular stall. There's no decoration, no color, just a low wooden table, a few rough benches, and a large iron pot set atop glowing coals. Heat spills out from the pot, and in the air, still heavy with morning damp, the rising aroma is unmistakable. Rich and warm, with a trace of pepper and a faint sweetness of stewed onions. The stall is run by a woman in her 40s, hair tied back neatly, wearing a thick wool dress the color of ash, and an apron faded from long use. She's ladling dark brown spheres from the pot, placing them to drain on a wooden board. Each one is about the size of a hen's egg, slightly glossy from fat, but holding its shape. When steam rises from them, the scent of meat and blood mingles, round, full, and dense. You step closer and she smiles, introducing them. Blood pudding balls, food to carry you through the winter. To the unfamiliar ear, the name might bring hesitation, but here it's as familiar as bread or soup. She explains that to make a good batch, you need fresh blood from pig or cow, mixed while still warm with rolled oats, minced pork fat, chopped onion, salt, and ground black pepper. Sometimes, if she has it, she adds a bit of nutmeg or dried thyme. Not common spices, but ones that add a gentle complexity. The mixture is shaped into round balls, briefly boiled to set their form, then kept warm in the pot. Some soaking in a light bone broth, others left to drain and sprinkled with coarse salt. You order a small portion, served in a wooden bowl alongside a slice of coarse black bread. The pudding ball is hot enough that the warmth seeps through the bowl, forcing you to shift it between your hands. As you bring it closer, the scent of cooked onion and pepper comes first, followed by the deeper, earthier smell of blood, not sharp, but mellow and rich, like well-cooked liver. The first bite reveals a soft outer layer, moist but not crumbly. Inside, the texture is smooth like pâté but more elastic. The first taste is modestly salty, then comes the caramelized sweetness of onion, and finally, the slow bloom of pepper heat down your throat. The flavor of blood, mingled with oat, feels grounding, a quiet reminder that this is food made to sustain, not just to please. You eat slowly, noticing more with each bite. The oats have absorbed the blood, puffed up and tender, giving the mixture body without falling apart. The pork fat keeps everything from drying out, and its light richness softens the mineral notes of the blood. The woman tells you that in this region, blood pudding balls are usually made right after the late autumn slaughter, when fresh blood is still easy to come by. People eat them for breakfast before heading out to the fields or the sea. Just a few are enough to fuel hours of labor. In the depths of winter, when fresh meat is scarce, these become the main source of protein. She laughs and adds that if you head east toward the coast, you'll find a different version. The balls dropped into fish broth with dried seaweed and potatoes. The taste, she says, is a strange harmony, the sea and the blood finding a common tone. Hearing that, you recall stories from East Asia, where coastal villages make use of duck or fish blood. They mix it with rice flour, fresh herbs like scallion and ginger, then steam or poach it into soft dumplings served hot in broth. The flavor may differ, but the idea is the same, nothing wasted that might nourish, and even the humble can be transformed into a meal that satisfies and sustains. You savor the final bite, then use the bread to soak up what's left in the bowl. The warmth spreads from your stomach to your chest, softening even the sea wind as it threads its way through the market. The woman wraps a few more pudding balls for you, tucking them in large cabbage leaves tied with coarse twine. For the road, she says, when the wind turns again. You leave the stall, walking past the smoked herring vendor, the farmer's cheese counter, and baskets of freshly picked red apples. The red clay path at the far end of the market leads down to a narrow strip of sand where the smell of dried fish and salt hangs thick, a scent that belongs entirely to this coastal stretch of land. And there you sense that you're drawing nearer to your next meal, one where wood smoke and sea air will mingle, carrying the story from the fields all the way into the waves. Morning along the coastal region slowly brightens, but the sun still isn't strong enough to dry the fine mist clinging to the sand and the thatched roofs of low houses. You've just left the smoked herring stall at the edge of the docks, the scent of smoke still clinging to your sleeves, when you come across a small stall tucked beside the dirt road that leads into the village. There's no signboard, no splash of color, just a large cast iron pan resting on a stone hearth, and inside a layer of deep, golden fat bubbles gently. Every so often, the woman tending the pan tilts it, letting the fat wash over the edges, then scoops it back to the center with a wooden ladle. The smell rising from it is thick, savory, slightly salty, with a sharp edge that could only come from freshly rendered pork lard. On a wooden plank beside the stove, stacks of thin, round pancakes rest in uneven piles. They're golden brown and speckled, with crisp edges and soft, seemingly chewy centers. These are medieval pancakes, a dish that can be either humble or luxurious, depending on the ingredients and the occasion. The woman explains that in this village, pancakes are made from a mixture of barley or coarse wheat flour, eggs, milk, if available, and melted lard. No sugar, no leavening. Whatever sweetness there is comes faintly from the milk or from the eggs laid by free-ranging hens. The batter is thinner than bread dough, but thicker than today's crepes. Just enough to hold its shape and achieve the right thickness when poured into the pan. You order a fresh one, and she slides a wooden spatula underneath to flip it. A hiss rises immediately, fat crackling in tiny pops, and the scent blooms. Roasted flour, hot lard, warmth. Once cooked, she folds the pancake in half, lays it on a piece of coarse paper to absorb the grease, and hands it to you. Holding it, you feel the heat bleeding through the wrapper. The edges are lightly crisp, but the middle is soft with a subtle bounce. When you tear off a piece, it pulls slightly before separating, a sign of the chewiness the cook aims to preserve. The first bite brings a gentle saltiness from the lard, the toasted flavor of cooked grain, and a sudden sense of fullness. This isn't a light, playful pancake. It's the kind meant to sit heavy in the belly. One is enough to carry you through a full morning's work. The lard coats the surface, soaking into every strand of flour, making each bite moist and rich. She tells you that on special days, during festivals or when guests visit, some might add spices like cinnamon or nutmeg for fragrance, or drizzle honey over the top to elevate it. But in this village market, most pancakes are eaten plain, savory, fatty, and sustaining. You take a seat on a low bench beside the stall, eating slowly, watching people come and go. A group of fishermen just pulling their boats ashore stop to each buy one, eating as they stand, one hand still gripping their nets. An elderly woman buys two, wraps them in cabbage leaves to bring home to her grandchildren. Children hover near the stove, eyes fixed on each new flip of the pancake, as if waiting for a gift. The way this dish exists reminds you of others around the world. In East Asia, there are also savory fried flatbreads, sometimes with scallions or herbs folded in, eaten hot in the early morning. In the Mediterranean, olive oil might take the place of lard. But the principle remains the same, a thin, hot, rich pancake to start a day of labor. The sea breeze brushes past, carrying the salt of the water and the damp of dew. The pancake in your hand is still warm, and each bite leaves a fine sheen of fat on your lips, a soft reminder that lard was once a precious source of energy when meals were not always abundant or complete. By the time you finish, your stomach is noticeably warmer, your heartbeat slowed in the calm satisfaction of having eaten. The woman smiles and asks if you'd like to take a few more for the road, an offer that doesn't need persuasion. You already know the taste will linger longer than the sound of the waves beyond. You stand, taking with you a warm bundle of pancakes wrapped for the journey. The dirt road continues past small homes, then opens onto a wide stretch of sand where other seafood stalls are waiting. And you know the next dish will likely carry the sea more clearly. The smell of fish, of seaweed, and that unmistakable flavor of the wind itself. As the red dirt road leaves the shoreline and guides you back to flatter land, the sea breeze gradually gives way to gentle winds from the grasslands. The sound of waves fades into the clatter of carts and the soft chime of bells hanging from the eaves of small shops. At a crossroads leading into a small town, you come across a stall set up right outside an old bakery. The aroma here is unlike the rich, greasy scent of the lard pancakes from earlier in the morning. This one is lighter, more delicate, with a thin layer of sweetness hanging in the air. The vendor is an old man in a cream-colored linen cloak, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. On the wooden table before him are two distinct offerings, a neat stack of thin, crisp wafers and jars glass or ceramic filled with fruits, preserved in thick syrup, which he calls souquet. He begins with the wafers. These are thin, crisp cookies baked between two iron plates etched with patterns. The batter is made from finely sifted white flour, eggs, milk, and a little sugar. When poured into the mold and pressed over a charcoal stove, the batter rises slightly, forming a wafer barely a few millimeters thick. The embossed patterns often depict vines, flowers, or religious symbols, depending on the season or occasion. The old man picks up a freshly baked wafer. Its warmth still softens it slightly, but just a few seconds in the cool air is enough to turn it crisp again. As you take the first bite, it shatters into tiny flakes, releasing the scent of milk and eggs along with the gentle sweetness of lightly caramelized sugar. It doesn't fill you up, but leaves a sense of quiet satisfaction, like something refined and complete has just passed through your senses. He shares that wafers were once reserved for major feasts or aristocratic banquets, since refining flour and forging patterned iron molds were costly and required skill. Over time, simpler versions spread to towns and became popular snacks or light desserts. Next to the wafers are the jars of squeak, a way to preserve and transform fruit into a sweet treat. Squeak is often made from berries, plums, or sliced apples and pears. After being thoroughly cleaned, the fruit is soaked in thick sugar syrup, sometimes with honey, to allow the sugar to penetrate and draw out moisture. Over several days, the mixture thickens, encasing each piece of fruit in a glistening amber syrup. He opens a jar of plum squeak. Inside, the small plums look as if they've been frozen in a world of sweetness. When you scoop one out with a spoon, the syrup stretches in delicate threads. Placed in your mouth, the softened skin gives way easily, the flesh still intact but melting slightly, releasing its original tartness, now mellowed by deep sugar and a hint of cinnamon. The old man explains that squeak is not just dessert, it's a way to hold on to fruit through the winter. In colder regions, when harvests are over, this may be the only way to keep a trace of summer's flavors in the snow-covered months. Squeak can be eaten on its own or paired with wafers to balance crunch with softness, subtle with intense sweetness. You try his suggestion, placing a plum squeak piece onto a wafer, taking a bite, and letting the crisp shell mix with the syrupy center. It's a curious but harmonious combination. The crispness gives structure, the moist fruit fills the gap, and each bite offers two rhythms, one for the sound, one for the flavor. Seated on the bench by the stall, you watch passers-by. A young couple buys a few wafers to take home, while children each receive a squeak plum as a treat. The soft crunch of wafers and the slurp of syrup create a soundscape that's not loud, but warmly familiar. You recall similar confections from other places. In East Asia, fruits are dried, then candied, but they tend to be drier and less syrupy than squeak. In the Mediterranean, there's frutta candita, whole fruits slowly simmered in syrup until saturated, then dried, so sugar crystals coat the surface. Different techniques, but the same idea, preserving sweetness and scent from the harvest, so winter isn't just meat and bread. You finish the last bite of the wafer and squeak, the sweetness still lingering on your tongue, the gentle aroma of baked batter still drifting in the air. The old man wraps a few wafers and a small jar of squeak in cloth, ties it with twine for the road, or for evening by the oil lamp, he says. You leave the stall and continue along the cobbled road toward the outskirts of town. In the distance, a row of small shops lines the edge of the water, surely holding dishes with even more of the sea's essence. And in your mind, the sweetness of squeak and the crisp whisper of wafers remain like a bass note ready to welcome the stronger, saltier flavors yet to come. The stone path leading out of the town takes you alongside a wide river. The water flows slowly, reflecting the silvery grey light of the afternoon. Near the river mouth, you begin to hear the sound of the sea mingling in, a quiet warning that the tide is rising. The air here is damp and carries the distinct scent of river mud blended with sea salt, a smell both earthy and briny, so familiar to those who live by the water that they barely notice it anymore. You walk a bit farther, past a few white-painted wooden houses with low roofs, and spot a small eatery tucked close to the edge of the pier. Its door is wide open, and from within drifts the aroma of hot oil blended with the sweetness of cooking fish. On a table near the stove are stacked bamboo baskets filled with eels already cleaned, their long, slick brown bodies occasionally still twitching when touched by the cook's fingers. The shop owner, a broad-shouldered man in a canvas apron, is slicing the eels into hand-sized segments, then dipping each piece quickly into a batter mixed with spices. He explains that the eels here are caught from both river and sea, depending on the season. River eels are sweeter and firmer, while sea eels are fattier and more intense in flavor. A large cast iron pan sits on a charcoal stove, the oil within gently bubbling. As the eel pieces are dropped in, a sharp sizzle sounds, followed by an explosion of fragrance, the batter turning golden, the oil mingling with the sweetness of eel meat, and a hint of warm spice pepper or crushed dried chili. The batter shifts from pale yellow to deep gold, with crisp brown edges signaling it's perfectly fried. You're served a portion just as it's taken from the pan, placed on a wooden plate lined with paper to absorb the oil. The eel pieces are piping hot, their crisp outer shells giving way to pearly white, slightly chewy meat. At the first bite, the contrast is immediate. The brittle crust crunches under your teeth before giving way to the soft, firm eel inside, rich and subtly sweet. The hot oil has mellowed any fishy scent, leaving only the clean taste of meat and spice. The shop owner places a small dipping bowl beside you filled with vinegar, salt, and thin slices of purple shallot. The light acidity cuts through the richness, balancing the oil and making the dish feel lighter despite its heat and fat. You eat slowly, noting how the batter is just thick enough to hold in the juices, but never overshadows the flavor of the eel itself. He tells you that fried eel has been a riverside market specialty for centuries. On festival days, when fishermen bring in catches of fish and eel, there are always cooks ready to fry them on the spot, the scent alone drawing crowds. It's street food for travelers, quick to eat by hand, and also a favored snack among sailors and merchants with wine or ale in hand. He adds that in the southern coastal ports, eel is sometimes spiced with turmeric and cumin seeds, giving the fried pieces a bright golden hue and bold aroma. Meanwhile, in East Asia, eels are often grilled with soy sauce or sweet glaze, though some versions are fried crispy and served with herbs and white rice. Everywhere, eel is seen as both humble and prized, hard to catch, rich in meat, and unmistakably delicious. Outside the shop, small boats begin to dock. Fishermen unload baskets of fish, crates of clams, and even a few live eels. The murmur of bargaining voices rises, mingling with the rhythmic chop of knives on cutting boards, forming a soundscape both busy and measured. You take your final bite, still feeling the warmth of oil on your lips and fingers, even as the river breeze grows cooler. The shopkeeper wraps a few more freshly fried eel pieces for you, bundling them in paper and tying the parcel with twine. You take the warm bundle, it feels like a portable stove in your hands as you continue along the pier, knowing more dishes lie ahead. They may carry stronger salt or deeper smoke, but they all belong to this same world shaped by water's edge. You sit on the stone embankment, the warm parcel of fried eel beside you, and in front, the water darkens slowly under the weight of dusk. The scent of sea salt and fried oil still clings to your sleeves, mingling with the damp breeze rising from the river mouth. Though this place belongs to a coastal corner of Europe, the scene suddenly evokes memories of Edo period Japan, a life equally tied to water but across the ocean. In your imagination, you find yourself standing in Nihonbashi, the bustling commercial district of Edo, modern-day Tokyo, in the 18th century. Night has fallen, but rows of paper lanterns hung from vendor stalls cast their warm glow across the street. The soft orange light sways with the breeze, reflecting off the damp stone pavement glistening from an earlier rain. Lining both sides of the street are stalls selling grilled fish, the air thick with the aroma of saba, ayu, and small salmon searing over bamboo charcoal. The vendors fan the flames gently, keeping the fire low but steady, allowing the skin to blister and glisten while fat drips, one drop at a time. You imagine holding a skewer of salt-grilled saba, its skin slightly crisp, the white flesh tender and rich, so hot you'd have to blow gently on each bite before eating. Next to it, a dango stand sells skewered rice dumplings, lightly grilled, then glazed with a sweet, soy-based sauce. The outer layer is slightly chewy, the inside soft and sticky, and the sauce offers a perfect balance between salty and sweet, a simple flavor that makes you want another. Farther along is a stand with an early version of taiyaki, round, filled pastries rather than fish-shaped. Thin batter is poured into cast iron molds, a spoonful of sweet red bean paste placed in the center, then pressed shut and cooked over charcoal. When the mold opens, the scent of toasted flour and warm beans rises, comforting even in the cool night air. Edo's night market sells more than food. The calls of tea vendors, hot sake sellers, and miso soup hawkers blend with the laughter and chatter of customers. You picture a group of merchants winding down after a long day, seated around a low wooden table, skewers of grilled fish, a bowl of white rice, and a steaming cup of sake before them. Compared to the European coastal market you just passed through, where fried eel, salted grilled squid, and smoked herring reign, the night streets of Edo carry the same spirit: quick food for the hand, light sweets to end a meal. The difference lies in ingredients: rice instead of barley, local freshwater fish instead of deep-sea catch, and imported cane sugar for refined desserts. Back in your present seaside setting, the last bite of fried eel has cooled, but the richness lingers. Waves gently tap against the stones, and from a nearby tavern, someone pours a drink into an earthen cup, its amber color catching the light, sending up a warm, intoxicating aroma. From country markets, harbors, and imagined nights in Edo, the story now drifts toward a new theme. Drink, those enduring companions of humanity through the ages, from river water to milk, beer, wine, tea, and sake, sometimes a thirst quencher, sometimes a ritual, and at times an entire civilization built around a single cup. You rise, carrying the now empty paper parcel, still scented faintly of oil and pepper, and head toward the riverside tavern. Night has fully arrived, but the story of drink has only just begun. You step into the small seaside tavern and choose a table by the window where the soft sound of waves brushing against the stone embankment can still be heard. The tavern owner places before you a thick-walled earthen cup, its surface slightly rough still, bearing the feel of clay fired by flame. Inside is a dark amber liquid, slightly cloudy, not as clear as wine, and releasing the aroma of fermented grains. You lift the cup and take a small sip. The first taste is not quite sweet nor bitter, but a blend of both, with a faint tang at the tip of your tongue. A gentle fragrance of roasted barley lingers, as if you had just opened a sack of freshly ground grain. Another sip, and warmth spreads from your throat to your stomach, and in that moment you realize you've touched something that has traveled alongside humanity for thousands of years: beer. From this flavor, your mind drifts back through time across centuries and oceans to the ancient land of Mesopotamia, where the first drops of beer were likely poured from rough clay vessels. You imagine yourself standing on the banks of the Euphrates River around 5,000 years ago. The sun hasn't risen high yet, but pale golden light glimmers on the fields of barley stretching across the fertile land. Here, where the river's silt nourishes the soil, people have begun growing grains not just to eat, but to drink. In a small village near the rounded granaries, a few women work around large clay jars. They're not brewing beer the way we know today, no glass bottles, no cork stoppers, but letting mixtures of barley, water, and wild yeast ferment slowly in earthen jars. The process is unmeasured, reliant on time and weather. The smell from these jars is not like modern beer. It's closer to wet bread, slightly sour, yet strangely inviting to those familiar with it. People drink it through long reed straws to avoid the sediment at the bottom. With each sip, the thick liquid carries the flavor of grain, of time, and of the earth it came from. In Mesopotamia, beer wasn't just a beverage. It was food rich in calories, more durable than bread during hot months, and safer than river water, which often carried disease. In reliefs and cuneiform tablets, beer appears beside feasts, rituals, and trade deals. Laborers building cities and temples were even paid in beer, several liters a day as part of their wages. At the center of this story is Ninkasi, the Sumerian goddess of beer. People believed she gifted humanity with the recipe for brewing beer, a divine offering. An ancient Sumerian poem, often called the Hymn to Ninkasi, not only praises her but also records the brewing process, from baking barley bread, bapir, soaking it in water, to allowing fermentation to begin. In your mind's eye, you see a ceremony at Ninkasi's temple, rows of beer jars neatly arranged, priests in white robes, and the scent of fermenting grain drifting through the courtyard. Attendees drink from a communal jar, a gesture of unity. Harps and small drums play in the background, mingling with quiet laughter. That feeling of community sharing a drink from a common source isn't unique to Mesopotamia. It repeats across civilizations. In ancient Egypt, beer was also a daily staple, brewed from emmer barley, consumed alongside bread, and offered to the gods. But in Mesopotamia, where Ninkasi was worshipped, beer was both a necessity and a symbol of divine connection. You imagine holding one of the first clay beer jars, thick-walled, wide-mouthed, speckled with the fingerprints of its maker. It's not ornately decorated, meant instead to keep beer cool in the shade. The liquid inside tells the story of harvests, sweet and full if the barley thrived, thinner and sour if the rains came too often. Returning to the seaside present, the earthen cup in your hand becomes an invisible bridge from this little tavern through the centuries to the fields of Mesopotamia, where the first beers were ever poured. The flavor still carries something primal: grain, water, time, and the hands of people. Outside, waves continue lapping softly against the stone edge, and the sea breeze carries the scent of grain from your beer. The story is only just beginning, for after Mesopotamia, beer will continue its journey to Egypt, to Greece, to Rome, and to far-off lands where it becomes not just a drink, but a part of culture and ritual. From the barley fields of Mesopotamia, the imaginary river in your mind flows southwest, across the desert, and opens into a lush green valley stretching along the Nile. This place, too, had known the fermented grain drink for thousands of years, what the ancient Egyptians called henket. Egyptian beer was not a replica of its Mesopotamian counterpart, but rather a unique variant born of the land's own resources. Instead of regular barley, they used emmer, an ancient grain with small, hard kernels and high nutritional value. Emmer was the foundation of both bread and beer in ancient Egypt, and its presence essentially shaped the taste of the entire civilization. In a brewery on the outskirts of Memphis, some 4,000 years ago, the morning begins with the scent of toasted grain. Emmer was lightly roasted to bring out its aroma, then coarsely ground and mixed with water and crumbled pieces of baked bread. Unlike modern beer recipes here, bread was part of the fermenting process. Bapir, a type of dense, dry loaf, specially baked for brewing. The mixture of grain and water was poured into large, wide-mouthed clay jars, placed in the shade where natural yeasts from the air and the bread would begin their slow work. Fermentation could take days, and the result was a thick, golden brown liquid, cloudy, with a distinct aroma of fermented grains. Egyptian beer wasn't clear, didn't foam much, and was often drunk while still warm. It was poured into small jugs or earthen cups, drunk straight, or sipped through reed straws to avoid the sediment at the bottom. Its flavor was mildly sweet, slightly sour, a kind of liquid meal still rich in solids. Beer in Egypt wasn't just refreshment, it was nourishment full of starch, protein, and minerals from the emmer grain, all essential in a labor-intensive economy. This is why the workers who built pyramids, temples, and vast monuments were paid partly in beer. Records show each laborer could receive 4 to 5 liters of beer per day, divided across morning, noon, and evening. For them, beer was both food and safe water compared to the untreated river. A midday scene at a pyramid worksite comes vividly to mind. Rows of dusty laborers receiving large jars of beer. They sit in groups taking long gulps, leaving a ring of foam around their mouths. Laughter mingles with the wind across the desert, and in that brief rest, beer becomes their link, a small reward for their great effort. But beer was not just for workers. In tomb paintings, it appears in noble feasts, alongside grilled meats, fruits, and imported wine. It was also part of religious rituals offered to deities like Hathor, goddess of love, music, and joy, sometimes called mistress of beer. In grand festivals, beer might be flavored with honey or herbs for special taste and consumed all day and night. Archaeologists have discovered large-scale breweries near ancient sites, with dozens of clay jars arranged neatly, each capable of holding hundreds of liters. Nearby were hearths, grain-grinding tools, and dried beer, residue evidence of a continuous production system, enough to supply hundreds or even thousands of people. If you held an ancient Egyptian beer jar, you'd feel more than just a container. It would bear the imprint of its maker, faint finger trails, uneven firing marks, and dark stains where the beer once touched. These jars, even after thousands of years, still tell the story of a civilization that knew how to turn grain, water, and time into something that nourished and bound communities together. Back in the present, sitting in the seaside tavern, you take another sip of beer and feel as if you're drinking alongside the pyramid builders of 4 millennia ago. The grainy taste, the warmth in your belly, the humble essence of the drinkid, all transcends time. Outside, the sky has turned a soft orange, and the story of beer is far from over. From Egypt, this drink would travel along trade routes and military roads into the Mediterranean, and then into Europe, where it would evolve with added yeast, richer flavors, and become the kind of beer the modern world knows today. But before it goes that far, there will be places and moments where beer still keeps its primitive form, cloudy, thick, and slowly sipped like a meal. Whether in the clay jars of the Sumerians, the emmer jugs of the Egyptians, or the wooden barrels of later European monasteries, beer has never been just a thirst quencher. Wherever it has appeared, beer quickly stepped beyond the role of mere sustenance to become a symbol, a part of the rituals people perform for each other, and for what they hold sacred. Imagine a harvest festival in ancient Mesopotamia. In the temple courtyard, under wooden columns draped with flowers and colorful cloth, large jars of beer are arranged in a circle. The rhythmic sound of lyres and hand drums fills the air. Priests in long robes pour beer from the great jars into small earthen cups, passing them from hand to hand. Each sip carries more than the flavor of grain and yeast. It holds gratitude for a fruitful season, for rivers that did not run dry, and for gods who allowed life to continue. In Egypt, the festival of Hathor, goddess of joy and abundance, was also tied to beer. In one version of her myth, Hathor once set out to destroy humanity in a fit of rage, but the other gods tricked her by pouring beer dyed red to resemble blood. She drank, became intoxicated, and forgot her anger, thus sparing mankind. From that point on, beer was consumed during her festival as a way of honoring that world-saving drunkenness. On those days, riverbanks and town squares filled with music, laughter, and beer jars passed from hand to hand. When beer reached medieval Europe, it became central to a different kind of ritual communal tradition. In villages, weddings often called for a special brew, known in England as bride ale, where the beer was shared with the whole community, and guests' donations helped the newlyweds start their life together. In Germany, harvest feasts featured communal kegs drunk from together as a way of saying, "We made this season happen together." But beer was not only present in joyful times. In many cultures, it accompanied people even in mourning. In ancient Scandinavia, beer was brewed for funeral gatherings, served alongside dark rye bread and cured meats as a way of sharing life's strength with both the living and the departed soul. In certain Slavic traditions, beer or kvass would be poured onto the grave as a farewell. Take this with you on the journey to the next world. That image hands pouring beer onto the ground, the dark liquid soaking into the earth, is not so different from drink offerings in many ancient rites. To the people of old, beer wasn't merely the product of grain and water, but the result of labor, of harvests, of time. To share beer was to share life itself. Even in organized religion, beer sometimes retained a sacred role. In some medieval European monasteries, it was known as liquid bread, consumed by monks during long fasting periods when meat was forbidden. These monastic beers were thick, rich, and crafted with growing skill. Some abbeys became famous solely for their brewing. Picture yourself at a medieval beer festival, a crowded village square, large wooden barrels at the center, their taps flowing non-stop. The air is thick with the scent of roasted malt, grilled meat, and fresh bread. Laughter rings from all directions, wooden mugs clink together, and a few drops of beer spill onto the earth each time someone raises a toast. This is not just a party, it's a declaration that the community is strong, that there is enough to share. Now contrast that with a winter funeral. In a large wooden hall, people sit around a coffin in silence, the flickering oil lamps casting soft yellow light on somber faces. A single keg of beer sits in the corner. Each person pours themselves a mug, drinks slowly, and nods in quiet acknowledgement. No words are needed. Beer becomes the medium of mourning, of presence, of shared memory. Through thousands of years, beer has outgrown its original form to become a language of community. It can mark a beginning, a wedding, a coming of age, or an ending, a death, a farewell to a season. It can be linked to cheerful deities or accompany sorrowful stories. But wherever it is, in any setting, drinking beer together always means more than quenching thirst. Back in your seaside reality, you realize that the earthen cup of beer in your hand contains not just amber-colored liquid. It holds the memory of humanity harvest festivals in Mesopotamia, joyful days in Egypt, village weddings in Europe, and quiet goodbyes in the cold soil. Every sip is a fragment of a story humans have told one another since the first seeds were sown and yeast first stirred. Outside, night has fully fallen, but the story of drink is far from over. After beer, there will be others: Mediterranean wine, Japanese sack, and sweet concoctions that crossed oceans with merchants. All will follow, like chapters in a book that never truly ends. Once fermentation had begun, and the scent of fermented grains filled the air, it wasn't just a new drink that was born. That cloudy golden liquid quietly changed the way people lived, anchoring them in one place longer, turning small communities into villages, towns, and eventually full-fledged civilizations. Let us return to the moment when humanity first began to leave behind the nomadic life of hunters and gatherers. They had learned to cultivate grains, barley, wheat, millet, not just for food, but also for storage. And grain held a strange quality. When kept dry, it could last a long time. But when met with water and a bit of luck or accident, it began to develop a strange fragrance and taste. That was when wild yeast appeared, converting starch into alcohol. No one knows exactly when beer was first discovered. Perhaps a sack of barley was forgotten in the corner of a granary, soaked by rain, and when opened, a sweet, warm smell emerged. Or perhaps it was a pot of porridge left unattended, transformed into a tangy, drinkable liquid. But from that moment on, humanity recognized a new value. To have beer, they needed grain. To have grain, they needed harvests. And to have harvests, they had to stay in one place. Thus, settlement. The great turning point in human history was driven not only by bread, but also by beer. Barley became a staple crop not just because it could be eaten, but because it could be brewed into a nourishing drink, long-lasting and safer than most natural water sources. From those barley fields, trade routes began to take shape. Grain was harvested, dried, bagged, and transported by boat along rivers or by camel across deserts. These sacks of grain were not only exchanged for meat, salt, and cloth. They became units of value, an early form of barter currency. In cuneiform records from Mesopotamia, beer and barley appear frequently in contracts detailing quantity, quality, and delivery dates. At the great river ports of Uruk or Babylon, you can imagine boats laden with barley pulling in to dock. The scent of sun-dried grain mingles with river mud and the smoke from nearby breweries. Buyers inspect each sack, bite into a kernel to check for dryness, and nod in approval at the satisfying crunch. Those very sacks would become beer, not just for local consumption, but for sale in faraway regions. Beer, then, was not merely the final product of agriculture, it was the engine of commerce. It created the need for transport, storage, and preservation technologies. Wooden barrels, clay jars, woven sacks, all were improved to support the storage and movement of beer and its ingredients. In some areas, the scale of beer production was large enough to support specialized roles: the barley farmer, the miller, the brewer, and the trader. And from trade, settlements grew denser. Markets formed around river docks where beer was sold alongside dried fish, salt, pottery, and tools. The beer house, even if just a simple wooden structure with a few benches, became a gathering place for villagers and merchants. There, news was shared, deals were struck, and the stories of entire regions were passed by word of mouth. A mug of beer in hand could represent months of labor, sowing at the start of the season, waiting for rain, harvesting, drying, milling, fermenting, and finally, pouring. This chain of tasks required coordination within the community. If one person grew the grain, another harvested, and another brewed, they had to trust each other, to share, and to live close together. A village, then, was not just a place to live, but an economic and social network where every cup of beer was proof of cooperation. Curiously, in many ancient cultures, beer was also linked to power. Those who controlled the grain stores and the breweries often held significant influence. Distributing beer to workers, soldiers, or civilians was not merely logistical. It was a political act, a show of generosity or strength. A full beer cellar in the dry season signaled either a capable leader or, at the very least, a prosperous community. Picture a banquet at the Palace of Babylon. Stone-paved courtyards, torchlight flickering against glazed brick walls, and towering beer jars lined up along the edges. Guests raise their cups not only to drink, but to witness the wealth of their host, for such abundance required hundreds of bountiful fields, dozens of boats transporting grain, and weeks of brewing. All of this, from the barley seed in the field to the beer cup in hand, helped shape human society. It tied people to the land, encouraged them to work together, and forced them to build systems of storage, trade, and regulation. Beer did not simply reflect the birth of civilization, it helped create it. Back in the present, the earthen mug of beer in the little seaside tavern is still warm. But now when you take a sip, you don't just taste grain and yeast, you're tasting the history of the barley that spurred commerce, built settlements, and nourished the first communities, a history that every sip of beer still carries, no matter how much the world has changed. In the stories of beer we've traveled through, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from harvest festivals to river trade, there's one detail often overlooked in historical texts. For much of history, beer was brewed by women. Not because men didn't know how, but because in most early agrarian societies, cooking, baking, and fermenting were part of women's daily responsibilities. And beer, at its origin, was nothing more than a liquid food, a type of fermented porridge, before it became a commercial product. Imagine a morning in a Sumerian village over 4,000 years ago. As the sun rises over the Tigris, a woman stirs a pot of barley porridge over a clay hearth. Nearby, a few bapir loaves, dense, dry barley bread baked the day before, wait to be crumbled into a large jar with river-filtered water. In the days to come, this mixture will ferment into beer. No thermometers, no timers. Only experience passed down from mother to daughter, from an older neighbor to a newlywed. In ancient Egypt, tomb paintings also depict women grinding grain, pouring mixtures into jars, and ladling beer into smaller vessels. These images show they were not only brewers, but also controlled part of the household economy. Beer was currency, reward for labor, and at times part of a dowry. Even in mythology, women were closely tied to beer. Ninkasi, the Sumerian goddess of beer, was depicted as both a brewer and a bringer of blessings to the community. The hymn to Ninkasi is both a song of praise and a brewing recipe, and many scholars believe it was sung or recited by women as they worked, a ritual that blended labor and prayer. In medieval Europe, the image of the alewife alewoman who brewed beer at home for local sale was common. They often hung a branch outside their door to signal that a fresh batch was ready. The alehouse was not yet the pub we know today, but more like a kitchen opened to neighbors. These alewives brewed, raised children, and quietly managed a slice of the local economy. Over time, however, as brewing became industrialized and moved into the hands of monasteries and merchants, women's roles began to fade from official records. But their legacy remains not only in recipes, but in how we see beer as a part of everyday life. Today, many craft breweries are rediscovering these old recipes created by women, even naming their products after legendary alewives or ancient goddesses. Some research groups have attempted to recreate Sumerian or Egyptian beers using original ingredients and methods, baking bapir, fermenting in clay jars, drinking through reed straws. The flavors may be different, but the sense of community and connection is strikingly similar to what it must have been thousands of years ago. If you trace the long arc of beer's history, you'll find a woman's hand running through it. From the Sumerian mother stirring her barley, to the Egyptian woman pouring beer into a jar for her husband to take to the worksite, to the European alewife hanging a branch outside her home, and now to the modern female brewers reviving these ancient traditions. Sitting in the little seaside tavern, the earthenware mug of beer in your hand now carries more than the taste of grain. It carries the stories of hands that rinsed the grain, kneaded the dough, broke the bread, stirred the pot, and waited for the yeast to work. These were hands that sustained families, nourished villages, and sometimes even upheld entire communities. Outside, night has fully fallen. The waves continue to lap, and the scent of salt lingers in the air. This is the final chapter in a journey through the history of food and drink, from the medieval morning market, through the festivals of Europe and the Middle East, to this shoreline and back to the earliest civilizations. But through every moment, one thing remains constant. People have always sought to turn grain, water, and time into something that could nourish and bring them together. And perhaps the next time you raise a glass, whether in a noisy bar or a quiet room, you'll remember that its story isn't only about fields and rivers, but also about those who patiently waited for the yeast to work. Many of whom were women creating a liquid that has accompanied us from the dawn of civilization all the way to today. And so our quiet walk comes to an end. From fritters in a medieval market, to honey cakes at a fair, to beer that once built entire civilizations, every snack and sip was more than food. It was memory, ritual, and survival. Here on Historian Sleepy 365, these journeys are meant not to excite, but to ease, offering boring history for sleep, told in a calm and steady voice. If tonight's story helped you drift a little closer to rest, consider subscribing and returning whenever you'd like more gentle tales from your sleepy historian. For now, close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the echoes of markets, festivals, and ancient taverns fade into the quiet of your night.